If you lose separation of church and state, and not just in The Handmaid's Tale, but in history, religion will be used to oppress. It will be used as a weapon.
And it was like being on Handmaids and watching women's rights being taken while you're shooting supposedly a fiction.
That is becoming a reality. It is a reality.
If they can convince enough people that that was actually not essentially a tenet of the Constitution, that's when you really start seeing a Gilead be able to take place.
We are here at the end of Americans United's inaugural Summit for Religious Freedom, which was a huge success. Church-state separation, this foundational protection for all of our freedom to be ourselves, to live as ourselves, and to believe as we choose, free from other people's religious dictates, is so under attack.
This is an issue Amy and I both care about a lot. It should be the most unifying issue because it is such a fundamental and originally American value, the separation of church and state.
I opened the summit by actually telling a story. I asked people to think about what does religious freedom mean to you? And then I told a story of when a group of students from Stanford came to visit me at the office over their spring break, a religion class. And I asked the same question of them. And they had a one-word unanimous response: homophobia. And I said to the people at the summit, how tragic that something that enabled my ancestors and yours to flee religious persecution, now a tool of oppression. And that's something that enables us all, should enable us all to live as ourselves and believe however we choose, now synonymous with discrimination. How tragic and how dangerous.
That is unbelievable. Wow.
We have friends and family in the trans community who are currently being targeted with legislators who are inappropriately imposing their colossal misinterpretation, an inversion of the values of Jesus Christ to vilify and endanger the lives of people that we love.
We're like the most vulnerable people in the world. And if that was what Christ stood for, was their protections, the irony is just mind-blowing.
Yes. My experience and understanding of the values of Jesus Christ, and I know we're not, I know, they're values of radical inclusion, and those are the values of this country, and we're all safer when we embrace that.
Yeah, and I was also going to ask you just about sort of, women's issues and Handmaid's Tale. And, that is becoming a reality. It is a reality right now.
Yeah, I always feel funny, like the man between two women talking about women's issues. But Handmaid's Tale, I read that book in 1985. When it came out. It seemed like it could never happen. In the course of doing the show, it's unfortunately become more and more relevant, and there is this disturbing, slow, and not so slow boiling of the frog attack on women's most fundamental right to make decisions about their bodies. So unfortunately, it is more and more relevant. And again, it's by blurring the separation of church and state that they are able to weaponize these legislative moves. And I want you to talk, but one of the most...
No, he doesn't let me speak.
I don't.
It's Handmaid's Tale, come alive.
Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
I'm a method actor. No, I just want to say one last thing, which is that this issue can seem like an abstract civics issue, but it is not. It's not a civic abstraction. It is a very practical way to deal with the tyranny of minority rule, which is rising in this country, because it takes away the rationalization that they're using. So rights issues, women's issues, all of these things that the state legislatures are targeting.
It's so sad because I was also a part of a show called Transparent, where at the beginning of making of that show, it felt like we were at a moment in history when the world was really, where America was shifting to a greater understanding and openness and inclusion. And then I was also on that show when the Trump administration came into power and they started to ban trans people from the military. And it was like being on Handmaids and watching women's rights being taken while you're shooting supposedly a fiction. And it's really chilling when you are part of an artistic creation that literally is mirroring, almost preemptively, like showing you where things can go and then where they are now. No one thought when that show started that that was possible. And then it's not even off the air yet, and things are happening that mirror that content. And it's absolutely horrifying. And I do think when Roe v. Wade was overturned, people started to see how it really affects on a personal level. And people that I knew who were pro-life were like, I don't really know if I want that in the government's hands, though,
Right.
because I didn't think about that situation. Or, no, of course I wouldn't want my daughter, if she had been raped, to have to, or I would, like, but people don't realize how personal the political is. And this, like you said, something that can seem like, oh, something I learned in high school, just separation of church and state.
Right.
Not only is it not taken for granted, I mean, you're having to create legislation to restore the intent
Right.
of legislation
That's right.
that was trying to uphold it.
And just today, we were walking by, and there was something on CNN about the hundreds of anti-LGBTQ bills. When groups that have been excluded from the protections of equal rights ask simply for the rights that others enjoy, for many people that feels like oppression.
Nobody chooses to be marginalized.
Right.
Nobody wants to be the person that people are literally lobbying to take your rights away. Like, oh, that sounds like a good time.
Right.
The targeting of communities based on gender and sexuality is the oldest trick in the fascist handbook.
Yes.
That's who you target first, because you can rally people by pointing out that other people are different. It makes people
Exactly, yeah.
uncomfortable.
And religion becomes this tool that's misused in order to impose a very ultra-conservative, oppressive political agenda on everyone. And this country has this really interesting attitude towards religion. It's a pretty religious country as compared to a lot of others. And actually a lot of scholars have said that's because we have church-state separation, so religion has to compete. It's not like imposed through the state. It's competing for its survival.
It's a market.
It's a free market for religion.
In order for religions to thrive, we need this separation.
Exactly. I'm a person who has a religion. I was raised in the Reformed Jewish faith. I'm a proud Reformed Jew. I work for the Reformed Jewish movement, raised my kids Jewish, etc. But it can't be that there's like no sincerity virtually that's required. So I can just say like, well, my religion says I don't need to get, or I shouldn't get a vaccine. And then when everyone else is required to get one and no religion actually says that, we've seen, just somehow you pull the religion card and you get out of jail free, you get out of anything.
Right.
And that's, how can we coexist as such a pluralistic and intentionally diverse country if we're gonna allow people to just pull out religion as a permission slip to be able to harm other people or get around the protections that we establish as a shared people? Amy, your point about that was a really interesting way of putting it. Like, you're on these shows, sometimes they're showing the evolution, like you're really proud, like, look, I'm on this show, and right, like some folks came up to you and said how meaningful.
When Transparent came out, I would have people just randomly on the street come up crying to me, always, telling me what it meant to them, or telling me that they had a child, and telling me that they'd never felt like they were represented. And we really felt like we were part of an incredible, beautiful moment in history. And then it was like, to watch what's happening now, I cannot tell you how devastating it is.
And so
it's like the door's just going boom.
And this is what I'm trying to say. I think that what we're witnessing now across this country, with this horrific surge of religious extremism and Christian nationalism, oppressive surge, right, coming after, all of us, coming after public schools.
Self-declared Christian nationalists.
Self-declared Christian nationalist movement is a reaction to the fact that we have been winning.
Right.
That we
Right.
are on the winning side of the trajectory in America, that we're on the right side of history, that we actually should and do own the flag proudly in this country and the Constitution. Church-state separation is protected in the first 16 words of the First Amendment. We're on the winning side of history. And what we've witnessed lately is the first Black president, the legalization of marriage equality throughout the land, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, an unprecedented number of women elected to Congress.
Yeah.
And we can go on and on about all the progress. And so it's Van Jones who called what we're witnessing now at heart a white lash.
Right.
Which
Right.
I think is a lot sort of underscoring the fear in, and I'll steal my colleague Andrew Seidel's wonderful line, what we're witnessing is the fear of this minority group raging against the dying of their privilege.
Yeah. The only thing that's really tricky is if you look at Nazi Germany, that turn and that ability for us to not win historically is always, there's a urgency and a sliver of protection that's got us ahead, right? Like this is not, we're not winning by a large margin.
Right.
There's been incredible progress, but it takes like one truly gifted, oppressive, fascist, insane leader and enough people in fear,
Right.
and everything can just turn.
Right.
As important as culture is in representation, in a lot of the things I've done that have been sort of politically relevant, putting a human face on abstract issues. As important as culture is, politics is the way we create our moral vision. I use the example, the West Wing, didn't help you if you had a pre-existing condition. We had to pass a law. Handmaid's Tale, big hit. I think the point of view is pretty clear. Yeah. But it won't help you if you're a rape victim in Ohio. It's going the other way. Why is it going the other way when it is absolutely a minority view to get rid of choice, to restrict voting rights? Why is that happening? We tend to take politics for granted. We think culture will create our moral vision. And while I've been making television shows, they have been focusing on all the levers of power. They have been focusing on a judicial strategy that has brought us to this insane moment with a totally unrepresentative, corrupt Supreme Court. We need organizations like Americans United to focus on this and to frame this as a patriotic issue, as an issue that advocates for the exercise of all faiths.
We are launching a campaign this spring that's going to be called something I think very patriotic, which is One Nation, All Beliefs. And it's an obvious play on what the Pledge of Allegiance. We're asking people actually to take a pledge right now as the first step of this campaign. But it is deeply patriotic, and it's saying, in the 1950s, when Under God was added to our Pledge of Allegiance, that was intended to divide us. That was intended to narrow who counts as a true American.
Right.
And we're here to say we need a new pledge, and the pledge should be to one nation, all beliefs. And that's something that we're calling on everyone out there to join us in, because it has to be time right now for a national recommitment to church-state separation.
Bradley and I have both taken the One Nation, All Beliefs pledge. And I have to admit that I was not aware that Under God was added in the 50s. And so to take that pledge felt really, really important, because it highlights my commitment to fighting for the issue of separation in state, and also my acknowledgement of my lack of awareness around the true history of the eroding of the separation of church and state, which I think is really important that I learn more about things that I've just thought were part of, the original writings of the birth of this country, and they're not. They have been the evolving, eroding of the original writings of this country. So yeah, it was really cool to take that pledge.
So we are so happy that you are with us. You two were two of the first ones to sign the pledge, which is deeply meaningful to us. I mean, it's so funny the way we all sort of criticize our sectors, you know, because we always are talking about, well, we don't hit the culture, you know, what I mean? It's like we're just off here in our own little bubble, and you know, like how are we gonna win over hearts and minds?
These shows and the art that does expose you to the characters, where you can see yourself and know that you have a place to exist, are incredibly important personally. I think what we feel is that we get over celebrated in this culture, and that the people who are truly the ones that need our support and our money and our energy and our time are people like you and people at AU who are, and people who go to Capitol Hill and truly do the work of making the laws reflect what is the shift, because I think that shift is there. But if you don't have, as we've all seen, if you don't have the votes and you don't have the judge on the court, it will affect you personally and keep you from being able to keep your freedoms. And so it's like the two are definitely in tandem, but we definitely get incredibly fulfilled being with people who we feel like there's real action taking place, because it's very frustrating to feel like everybody's kind of in some sort of agreement, but the laws aren't reflecting that.
And I think it's really important to always remember, and I always want young people to know this, and I'm inspired by young people's political engagement now, because of course they have every right to be frustrated with the political system. Despair is a luxury your future can't afford, and action is the antidote to despair. And we will never reach a point where injustice, racism will disappear. This fight will never end. Don't expect it to, because we don't get a democracy. You gotta make it every generation, every day. And I just want young people to engage in issues like this, so that the most fundamental promise of democracy is that your future is an act of your own creation. And if you don't participate in the political process, you're sentencing yourself to a gulag governed by the people governed by the people who do.
Right.
And I can tell you that those people are pursuing an agenda, a purely amoral business agenda.
I quoted, when I opened the Summit for Religious Freedom, I quoted Dr. Martin Luther King saying, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable." You know, and the quote went on that it is the work of people who are passionately concerned and dedicated and grinding away every day. And when I worked for the Reformed Jewish movement, I used to quote from the Ethics of Our Fathers this one line that really helped me keep going, which is, it is not our responsibility to complete the task, but nor are we free to desist from it. I just think we're living in a time in this country where it's easy to feel like you can't make a difference. And I think actually it's Gen Z who's not afflicted with that. I think the rest of us sort of have been more, or at least I'll speak for Gen X, you know, like, does my vote really count? You know, does my voice really count? And I think people have to start believing in the power of their voices again, because we're on the winning side. And that's what's so heartening, and that's one of the things that keeps me going. And you know, when we bring this conference together and see people who are queer and who are straight and who are Black and who are white and who are Asian and who are multiracial and who are, you know, Christian and Jewish and ethical culturist and spiritual and agnostic and atheist and humanist and Jewish humanist and everything, you know, it's like you just start to realize, like, this is what America looks like. This is a lot like Americans United, you know, and that's a great part of our name. But I mean, when our founders of our organization came up with it 75 years ago, I think they were onto something.
Yeah.
You know, and so how do we help people believe in themselves again, in a way, and that they can participate civically?
Young people have inspired me in the face of this. I've seen it in my home state of Wisconsin, where I'm involved politically. They have re-engaged civically. And that is the silver lining here. And if you look at what has happened in Wisconsin, which was sort of exhibit A of a right-wing attempt to use the tools of democracy to undermine democracy, we have young people there have engaged, fought back, and won. It is a permanent engagement, civic engagement among these young people, and it's really, really encouraging.
And this is why Americans United for Separation of Church and State is trying desperately to reach young people. And we have thriving initiatives going on to have these many young people coming to our summit, you know, people who've won our high school essay contest. And now we just expanded it to have a video component and to college, you know, people, young people who are part of our youth organizing fellowship that we started 3 years ago. And they work with us for a year. We pay them money. We give them the tools, and they give us the education, right, that we all are missing about their generation. And they're seeing the world a lot more clearly in many ways. And more than anything, to network with each other and to network with our generation of leaders so that we can set them up to have the connections and the tools they need to shape our law into the future to be there for the rights of all people. So we're really focusing on youth. Another reason is it would just be too depressing to just fight back all the time. We are the watchdog group, and you know, we have a lot of positive initiatives going on, but there's nothing like working with young people and making sure that despite all of this misinformation and disinformation, that they understand and value something as fundamental as church-state separation in as personal a way as all of us have come to. We know that's mission critical, and we're investing in that.
Reverend Blackman was talking about the idea that without true religious freedom, no religion is free. Religious freedom can't happen without separation of church and state. That's what we need to fight for.
Exactly. It's the guarantee of religious freedom. And it's that important. And every single religious person, in addition to every single non-religious person, should be strongly behind church-state separation for that reason alone.
Yes.
You all just graced us with your presence on Capitol Hill. We visited Senator Bennett's office, Senator Warnock's office. I was very moved. I was very moved by what each of you said, and you brought your personal passion for church-state separation. I was really moved today when one of the Americans United members from Georgia, who's a pastor from a rural part of Georgia, he actually cried in front of the staff for Reverend Warnock explaining, I think the question to him was, so if we pass the Do No Harm Act, how would that help you?
Yeah.
And honestly, that in another life, that would be a challenging question about church-state separation, because it's like abstract, and the founding fathers and the Constitution, all very important. I don't mean to make light of it. But this guy really drove it home when he cried and talked about his own experience being gay.
Yeah.
And that
In the South.
In the South. And
Yeah.
that he didn't feel he could even come out, you know, when he was in seminary.
And how oppressed he would have been.
And how
if it
oppressed
had-
he would
yeah.
have been, and how important it is to him
Yeah.
to separate church and state because of that part of his identity. And those moments are ones that I just wish we could disseminate widely, and everyone could be part of that, and hear that more, so that they understood the human fragility. If you want to really know how un-American our opponents are, you only need to look at the insurrection and who was there. Because that, again, that co-opting of the Christian flag and those religious extremists who were there saying a prayer to Jesus in the Senate chamber as part of the strategy to take down the government, take down the US government. I mean, that showcases in a nutshell that we are dealing with it's hypocrisy and an unpatriotic, a deeply unpatriotic, un-American movement that we're fighting.
They are using the tools of democracy to undermine democracy itself. And they are using a tool to protect religious freedoms, to undermine the separation of church and state, to undermine religious freedom.
I think you're right, using the tools of democracy against democracy.
That's what fascists do.
That's right, and that's what we're witnessing. I mean, there's really nothing more democratic than religious freedom. I mean, that's like one of the legs of the stool of the American democracy, and yet it's being weaponized to undermine religious freedom. There's nothing more democratic than church-state separation.
Yeah.
It's a core to our democracy, and yet Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent last term in a case called Carson v. Macon, which I'll tell you about in a minute, said, that the court in the previous set of cases around what she was writing about was taking us to a place where church-state separation was nothing more than a slogan. But now they're taking us to a place where church-state separation is unconstitutional. She said it. A Supreme Court justice said that of what her colleagues are doing. Last term was horrific when it comes to church-state separation. The Carson v. Macon case was a case that forced Maine taxpayers to fund religious education and discrimination. I mean, that's undemocratic. It forced the city of Boston to fly the Christian flag from its city hall flagpole against its will. So that's unpatriotic and un-American. They forced a public school district that was looking out for the religious freedom of its students in Washington state to have to keep a coach who pressured his players, his football players in a public high school, to pray with him at the 50-yard line following every football game. That's unpatriotic and undemocratic and un-American. And they took away one of the greatest freedoms of all, the freedom to control our own bodies, and something that is rooted in our religious freedom, because different belief systems tell us, as people who can get pregnant, different things about, they guide us in different ways about how to handle our bodies.
All of those rulings, it so proves the point of the erosion of separation of church and state, because what you're seeing is the religious beliefs of those justices creating their laws. It is as clear
as
their decisions.
And contradicting their job interviews, which were conducted under oath.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it's absolutely proof, because all they're doing is voting based on their personal religious beliefs, period.
Yeah, I mean, in Justice Alito's opinion in the Dobbs decision that overruled Roe v. Wade, his opening line and closing line was that abortion is a moral decision. And exactly, and because it is a moral and religious
then you
decision,
should not legislate.
Then you should not legislate it.
Exactly.
So it was clearly his code for basically saying, like, it's a conservative Christian problem. Abortion is a conservative Christian issue, right? I mean, that was just its code, and it's.
I think a lot of members of the Federalist Society have been pretty clear that they don't agree with the idea of separation of church and state.
That's the freaky part and the opportunity. So the freaky part is how many lawmakers are coming out
they're saying like
church-state separation doesn't exist.
Right.
And this is something where, like, when John F. Kennedy ran for president, the first Catholic, he had to give his bona fides to a group of Houston pastors around church-state separation in order to even be a viable candidate.
Yes.
That's how it was.
I will serve the American people, not the Pope.
Exactly. Right. And today, it's like these lawmakers.
But if they can
boasting.
erode that, if they can convince enough people that that was actually not essentially a tenet of the Constitution, that's when you really start seeing a Gilead be able to take place.
It's very
because
scary.
it is changing people's even understanding about the fundamental beliefs of what it is to be in a democracy in America. And it's saying, oh no, you've all been misled. There is no church and state separation, right. and that is, they are saying out loud, and very clearly that not only does it not exist, but that we are a Christian nation and our laws need to be based in Christian beliefs, and they're very, very clear about it. And
they are.
It's really going to be the most hard thing to undo, because it's that thing where people, that's the only source of information that they have. So it's just taken as being a belief that you're raised with, then that is this nation, that there is no church and state.
Right.
So we also have to keep pounding home the history, the real history.
The history matters. Oh, yes.
The Founding Fathers were seeking freedom from a country where there was no separation of church and state.
You know, we talk about saying the quiet part out loud. They certainly are saying the Christian part out loud. But let's listen between the lines. What aren't they saying out loud? You know, and what they aren't saying out loud is this is a white, Christian, straight. They are saying cisgender out loud, culture.
Yeah.
You know, that's who should have favor in
Right.
America.
Right.
Right. And that's who counts as the truest Americans. And I think it's important for us to also point out what they're not saying out loud.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why in the pledge we talk about, you know, fighting racial bias in
Yeah.
the name of religion, you know, and fighting attacks on abortion and reproductive justice in the name of religion, and fighting attacks on LGBTQ equality. You know, all these things that we know are very much part of what white Christian nationalism is attacking, some of which they're just not saying out loud. The other untold story, really, is their attack on public schools. And this is terrifying.
Yeah.
This is not out there in the open. I mean, the private school voucher movement has made such enormous strides. That type of program comes in many different shapes and flavors, but it diverts public funds from public schools to private religious schools. And we know from history that the roots of the private school voucher movement are in resistance to Brown versus Board of Education.
Right.
And the development of white segregation academies. And if we don't wake up to protecting church-state separation, we will find our public schools
Drained.
will completely drained. And they're already struggling. They also are amazing because it's amazing to have a school system, a public school system in your country that is inclusive. No matter how able-bodied you are, no matter what your belief system, no matter what your race, you matter equally. You're equal in that system. That's the requirement of that system. That is incredible, right? Easy to take for granted and a glue for our democracy. I mean, in America, where we don't all share a lot more than the core values that are laid out in our Constitution, right? Like having public schools that bring us all together are crucial.
I totally take that for granted.
Yeah. And 95% of Black and brown kids are educated in public schools. So we're also talking about an attack on the Black and brown community when we take away funding from those schools and divert them. And that's why supporting public schools is another part of the pledge.
Yeah.
Strategically, they know that if we don't have children who believe in the spectacular, unfulfilled promise of this country, which is an inclusive one despite its horrific shortcomings, especially in the past, if we don't acknowledge those kids believe in a different kind of country, not one that has separation of church and state, not one that aspires to inclusion and equality.
Separation of church and state is important to me because I just remember from the earliest years of my life hearing from both sides of my family. My mother's side was a very prominent Republican family in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my father's side was a very prominent Democratic family in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Both of my grandparents were professors at U of M, and they got along beautifully through the marriage of my parents. But I remember hearing stories about Joseph Welch, who was on my mom's side, who prosecuted McCarthy, and McCarthy was coming after people, and there was this weaponization of the government to destroy people's lives if they couldn't prove that they lived by certain ideals that they set, that they decided, that they were accusing people of not being patriotic, and again, all of that being cover for an incredibly deep, oppressive, racist, patriarchal agenda that is used in the veil of justice. And my great-grandfather, who was a Republican, said, "At long last, sir, have you no decency?" And America seemed to wake up in that moment. And there was a collective awareness. And then my grandfather was sponsored by University of Michigan. the horror story that we always heard was that he was in a public library in Berlin working on his dissertation, and he looked up and had been taken over by the Nazis, and he had no idea. If they knew he was Jewish, he would have been immediately detained. He escaped the library and escaped Berlin. Wow. And you go, my grandfather, I love my grandfather. Why on earth? What about my wonderful grandfather, who is this, brilliant professor? He was an attorney in Berlin. He became a sociology professor at U of M. He's this loving family man, this incredible human being. Oh, because he's Jewish. What does that mean? I couldn't understand it as a kid. I just couldn't understand it. And so I've just knew coming up, and to watch what's happening now, it really terrifies me. And I hate when people say, oh, liberals, you're always overreacting, and everyone's overreacting, and it's not, it's like, that's exactly how these things, we lose democracy, is this idea that, it's not going to be that bad. And it's that bad right now.
If you lose separation of church and state, and not just in The Handmaid's Tale, but in history, religion will be used to oppress. It will be used as a weapon. And that is what we are seeing already. And that is why we have to be as alarmed and as vocal and as active as possible in this moment, because it's a very dangerous turn. And in some ways, these radical extremists have been successful in normalizing it.
And it's a power grab, like you said. This is all power grabbing. When you say it's about,
do with religious values.
When you say it's about equality, it's because anytime the church is used as a sword and to bludgeon people, it is because somebody is getting to keep power. And so that's what they're really afraid of, is losing power. Yeah. And if we are a democracy and we believe in equality and we believe that every human here has certain inalienable rights, that's true. That's a real challenge if you want to hold on to your power.
Separation of church and state is important to me because comes up pretty quick in the Constitution. It is a fundamental condition to the possibilities of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I am really grateful in my own life. I was raised Quaker. I've been exposed to a number of different faith communities. Again, the Founding Fathers were acutely aware that they were seeking freedom from a country where there was no separation of church and state. And so I think it is an absolute precondition to allowing this country to fulfill its yet unfulfilled spectacular aspiration of equality and opportunity for all.
I love that you said equality, because I think more people understand that church-state separation is about freedom,
right,
than they understand it's just as much about equality. And
right.
That's what de Tocqueville said Americans love more than anything, and is more American than anything, equality.
Right.
That's what church-state separation is about. You got it. You nailed it.